for the transition to post-quantum cryptography, the QRAMM framework, and finally, how organizations can prepare. So first, the quantum era. So quantum computing is this type of computing that harnesses properties of quantum physics. So instead of using a bit, which could be 0 or 1, it uses a quantum bit or qubit, which can be any combination or superposition of 0 and 1. And basically, a qubit is a two-level quantum system. So that could be where 0 is the ground state, 1 is the excited state. That could be horizontal or vertical polarization of light. Really, a two-level system is a quantum bit. And quantum computing also takes advantage of entanglement, which is where two or more qubits are linked so that if you affect one qubit, it instantly affects the other qubit, even if they're at a great distance. So quantum computing takes advantage of these properties, and because of that, it can perform certain problems, certain computations much more effectively. And it's really a very different type of computing. It's not just classical computing, but faster. It's an entirely different way of doing computations. And we're currently in the NISQ era, that's NISQ, Noisy Intermediate Scale Quantum, because we're developing quantum computers. We're in the thousands of qubits now, but we still have a long way to go to solve a lot of these larger problems that we're interested in. So how does that affect cryptography? Well, in 1994, Peter Shor invented Shor's algorithm. It's an algorithm that factors efficiently. And this is important because RSA, one of the most common public key cryptography algorithms, is based off of the hardness of factoring. So if you can factor efficiently, you can break RSA. And classically, we cannot factor efficiently, but with quantum computers, we can. And it turns out that actually variants of Shor's algorithm can break Diffie-Hellman, elliptic curve cryptography, essentially all our public key cryptography, because they're all variants of a more general problem called the abelian hidden subgroup problem. So quantum computers can solve this problem very efficiently, even though classical cannot. So that means essentially all our public key cryptography will be obsolete once we have a powerful enough quantum computer to actually run these algorithms. And how does this affect other cryptography like hash and AES? Well, there aren't attacks specifically on these types of cryptography. However, there is Grover's search algorithm, which is a quadratic speedup on brute force search. So essentially that means to have the same quantum security as classical security, we just need to double the key length of, say, AES. So they're weakened, but they're not broken. And then a lot of people also ask about blockchain. So it seems like the blockchain architecture itself is not broken by quantum computers. However, blockchain uses digital signatures to prove ownership and authorize transactions. So those digital signatures are primarily elliptic curve signatures. So those will be broken by quantum computers. So Ethereum, Bitcoin, they'll need to transition their digital signatures. So I have a slide now about the NIST PQC standardization. So I'll just go over the algorithms briefly. Basically, in response to this upcoming attack on public key cryptography, NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, held a competition starting in 2016 to standardize new public key cryptography called post-quantum cryptography. And as of 2024, we now have actually started standardizing these algorithms. So Crystal's dilithium is a digital signature algorithm, now MLDSA, and similar mathematics, lattice-based cryptography, Crystal's Kyber, now MLKEM, those are the main algorithms that have been standardized. However, there's also alternatives based on different performance and types of mathematic problems underlying them. So we have a lot more faith in these algorithms than we did the public key because we actually have proofs of how difficult they are. We can't prove with absolute certainty that they'll never be broken, but we have proofs showing how hard they are to break. So the timeline, so we don't know when this quantum threat in terms of when a quantum computer will be able to actually break our cryptography, because there's so many factors involved and innovation is really up and coming with quantum computers. There's a lot of different approaches, so it's very difficult to know when this attack will actually happen. However, adversaries are already storing our encrypted data now so that they can decrypt it once they have a quantum computer. So we don't know, again, when that will be, if it'll be in a few years, if it'll be in 20 years. But we know that the data that they've collected, they will be able to decrypt with a quantum computer. So the guidelines is by 2030, we want to deprecate these public key cryptography, this classical algorithms. And by 2035, we really want a full transition to post-quantum cryptography. And that sounds like it's a long time away, but there's actually a lot that needs to be done to transition cryptography. And organizations that I've seen have algorithms implemented that have been deprecated for, say, 20, 30 years. So it's very difficult to transition. So that's why we want to get started as soon as possible. So an important aspect of post-quantum cryptography is cryptographic agility. So crypto agility is the ability to quickly and seamlessly transition your cryptography without major system redesign. And this is important because, of course, we want to be able to transition our public key, our classical public key, to post-quantum as easily as possible. But these algorithms have not been around as long, and we don't know if there's going to be a vulnerability that's found in one, or if we're going to have to change the parameters we're using, or even change the algorithm itself. So we want to make sure that our cryptography can be changed as easily as possible. So one way to do that is to avoid hard coding cryptography. So you don't want to actually in the code specify you're using, say, AES 128 CBC, because then if you want to actually change that, you have to actually go into the code and change that. So you want to try to abstract your cryptography away. So create a centralized service, for example, that developers can call instead of implementing their own cryptography. So now I'll talk about the QRAMM framework. So again, QRAMM, Quantum Readiness Assurance Maturity Model. It's an open source framework that helps with quantum readiness. And there's 120 questions, and each question has an explanation of why it's relevant, for multiple choice answers that help you tell what level of readiness you're at, and then also evidence to look for, because we really want this to be evidence-based, not just claiming how prepared you are, but actually having evidence to back up how prepared you are. And it's split across 4 dimensions, and each dimension has 3 practice areas. So once you finish the assessment, you can see at a higher level where you need to focus your attention. So the first dimension is cryptographic visibility and inventory. So this is basically evaluating your discovery, documentation, and governance of cryptographic assets. So basically knowing where and what libraries you're using, algorithms you're using, parameters, keys, CAs, HSMs, really just knowing where and how your cryptography is implemented, which is important, of course, because you need to know that in order to transition that cryptography. And it's also about knowing where your cryptographic dependencies are. And this visibility, again, a lot of organizations do not have it, so it's very important. Next is strategic governance and risk management. So this is really about planning. It comes down from the executive level of having that multi-year plan for transitioning. Then data protection engineering is all about the data you're protecting. So what data are you protecting? How sensitive is it, both short-term and long-term? Because again, we have that harvest now, decrypt later attack. And we also want to know how much exposure it is, because again, if it has a lot of exposure, that means adversaries could more easily take that encrypted information and decrypt it later. And this also just covers best practices in general for cryptography, such as being able to transition your symmetric cryptography as well. And lastly, implementation technical readiness. So this is really what assesses the crypto agility and how ready you are technically to implement these new algorithms. So now we can talk about how organizations can prepare. So first, you want to start by performing an assessment ideally. So if you already have assessments, you can review those results, but you might also want to perform a post-quantum assessment like QRAMM or another assessment from a consulting company to assess where you are. And you also want to assess where your vendors are as well, which is important. You want to know what their timelines are. Then again, inventorying your cryptographic assets. This can be doing things like network scanning with TLS scanners. This can be doing code scanning, looking at your HSMs, looking at your cloud, having that inventory of cryptographic assets. Then you want to develop that transition plan and also revise your policies so that they are up to date with the new standards. You also want to prioritize your data because, again, the harvest now, decrypt later attack, that affects us today. So intellectual property that you don't want to become public ever, or PHI, protected health information, or PII, personally identifiable information, things that are of long-term significance you want to prioritize, well as things as credit card numbers or information that's sensitive now but will become public soon, you don't have to prioritize as much. Then you also want to establish crypto agile architecture. So this is very important too. You want to make sure that in addition to being able to support these algorithms, you can support updates to these algorithms or swapping these algorithms. For instance, you might need to handle a larger digital signature than you're used to. So having the ability to switch this is very important. You also want to test out these algorithms, benchmark their performance. So choose some of these standardized algorithms. Again, you have options, so you might want to test their performance and benchmark them there. You can test out libraries that have these algorithms implemented, like OpenSSL 3.2, liboqs. And what also is really important right now is using hybrid cryptography. So using a classical algorithm like elliptic curve in addition to the post-quantum algorithms. That way you know you have that classical security, but you also have the post-quantum on top of that. And AWS also offers hybrid key exchange. TLS 1.3 has an option for hybrid key exchange as well. Then you want to actually deploy these algorithms. And you want to start with the KEMs, the key encapsulation mechanisms, because again, that's really what affects the harvest now, decrypt later. Whereas the digital signatures, you can wait more on those. So you'll want to implement pilot programs, and then eventually you want to do a phased deployment where you prioritize the high-risk systems and long-lived data, and eventually implement it across all your systems. And lastly, you want to monitor these implementations. You want to make sure that your inventory stays up to date, and you also want to make sure that you stay up to date with the evolving PQC standards and any algorithm or parameter updates and any vulnerabilities that come to light. So that is the quantum era is here, and I want to ask, are you ready for it? So thank you. And do we have time for questions? Looks like. All right, any questions? Yes.
Hi, my name's Taylor. I also live in Denver.
Oh, nice.
And I work for Quantum Start, QRAMM, for all of these initiatives that work in the call center. Are there any tool recommendations? I know I could lead as like a resource toolkit for migration. Do you guys offer any other ways to assist companies with migrating them?
Yeah, so this framework, again, this is open source. We actually have if you go to QRAMM.org, I forgot the slides are not up. If you go to QRAMM.org, you can find the GitHub repo, which has the full assessment, and we also have an automated quick assessment you can take. So you can actually get the results of how you're performing in different areas based on that. In terms of migration, there's a lot of tools out there depending on what you're looking for. Like for TLS scanning, you could do like test SSL, SSLIs, things like that. So I think it just depends what aspect of the migration you're looking at. But yeah, great question. Does that answer? Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, so It depends on what you're looking for exactly. Like if you're looking for code scanning, actually scanning the code, crypto linting, there are a lot of tools for that. I believe Bandit is one of them and CryptoGuard, but if you just look into crypto linting, that can help with the code scanning. And then again, TLS scanning, you can use that test SSL, SSLIs, Qualys, things like that. Abdel, I don't know if you have other tools to discuss.
Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Abdel. I realize some people came in late, so I look like a random guy, but I'm the co-creator with Emily Stem for PQC, the framework. So yes, there are vendor solutions out there that you can buy. But honestly, if you have the engineering effort, there are some open source tools that you can use. Something like TruffleHug, something that goes through your entire Git history. You can actually set that up to just look for cryptography, essentially. That's an easy way to identify, if your applications, easy way to identify which applications are using which encryptions. TruffleHug, there's several of these tools out there. Honestly, just look for like secret Git scan. Even GitHub has its own.
Yes.
So if you're implementing like AS256, which is, my understanding is considered, it's crackable, but it just weakens it a bit. Do you have advice for that? What should you give what advice would you give for using an algorithm like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with AES, basically you need to double the key length to get the same quantum security as classical security. So AES 128, against quantum would have 64-bit security, which is not ideal, but AES 256, that would have 128-bit security. So really going with AES 256 is that's the best way to go because you still have 128-bit security against quantum. Yes.
What's the process like developing cryptographic defense frameworks for technology that isn't readily available to
Do you want to?
I'm sorry, could you, I guess we don't have a mic. Could you repeat that?
Yeah. What's the process like developing a defense framework for technology that is still being developed?
Yeah, well, the truth is that they came up with algorithms that are strong to, withstand quantum, right? We don't have a quantum computer yet that's able to break our encryption today, right? But it's based on the hardness of math, right? That you're able to build defense. So your best defense today is really that preparation, right? Understanding what kind of cryptography are across your environment and make a plan to transition to this new secure, more secure, that is going to be quantum resistant, right? So once quantum becomes a thing, if you already have these already implemented, you're safe there.
Yeah, and I would just add too that the process for standardizing these post-quantum algorithms was very rigorous. So it went through 3 to 4 rounds of NIST actually trying to get everyone to see if they could break these algorithms for, I believe it's 8 years now. So it went through a very rigorous process. And so RSA, these classical public key cryptography, we don't really have security proofs for them. We just knew that classically factoring, solving these problems is very difficult. We just know that from many years, but we don't have proofs. But these lattice-based algorithms are what they're called. That's the primary type of post-quantum cryptography. We actually have security proofs that show they're as hard as solving very hard problems like NP-hard problems, for example. So we have a lot more faith in these algorithms that they are both classical and quantum secure. But again, that's not provable security, so in the sense that you can never prove for sure that there won't be some attack that's found. So that's why being able to transition quickly between them and transition parameters is very important. Yeah, thank you. Yes?
Do you know of any government agencies or federal contract work that's large?
For
AES 256?
Oh, yeah, or for AES or for the post-quantum, the FIPS. Oh, yes. Government agencies are requiring that I don't know the exact timeline. Let me see if I have that. Oh, but go ahead, Abdel.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So NIST is good at giving guides and really less of a mandate. So I think as mandates goes, I think finance is likely going to be affected first, where the government says, hey, you have to do these things to keep your customers' data secure. But as far as mandates, I haven't seen any.
So NIST or NSA, it seems, is mandating it by 2030. So if you want to do any work with that agency by 2030, you need to. But they are already transitioned. A lot of these agencies have already transitioned to post-quantum cryptography, or the hybrid classical and post-quantum combination. Yeah.
Is there a question back there?
Yes.
The question of the formalization of the standard is to actually formalize the encryption method as post-quantum. Is that a question of demonstrating hardness, or is it just like, oh, here's your software, and it's not used?
Is it a question on the
Hardness of the problem, I think.
the hardness of the new problems?
If you have an encryption method and you want to say it's post-quantum, what's the measurement that you use to gain that information?
So for the post-quantum, is the question, how do you know if the algorithm is post-quantum, or how do you get that status? Is both. So that, I think the best way is going through this NIST competition, because again, it went through 8 years of these algorithms being tested and researchers all over the world trying to find any attacks that they can, and also proving that they're secure as these hard, it's called lattice-based cryptography. So it's these hard lattice problems. And these lattice problems too, they weren't developed just 8 years ago. They've actually been around for decades. It's just that the cryptography using them is a little bit more recent. And NIST, there were a lot of algorithms that NIST considered, but it didn't just look at hardness. It also looked at how easy it is to implement, what performance it has, and things like that too. So there was a lot of components that went into it. And I think we're done?
Yep.
All right.
Time.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.